The Montana prairie stretched endlessly under a blazing summer sun, its golden grasslands broken only by the occasional stand of cottonwoods and the distant purple silhouette of the Rocky Mountains. Jack Dusty Rivers guided his horse through a shallow creek, the water providing blessed relief from the oppressive heat as he made his way toward the town of Bear Creek with a herd of horses he'd broken for the local ranchers. At 28, Dusty had spent most of his adult life on the frontier, working as a horse trainer, occasional scout, and sometimes deputy when the local sheriff needed an extra gun. He'd learned to read the land like a book, to spot trouble from miles away, and to trust his instincts when something didn't feel right. Today, something definitely didn't feel right. The sound reached him first, the thunder of hoof beats moving fast across the prairie, accompanied by shouts and the occasional crack of a rifle. Dusty reined in his horse and stood in his stirrups, scanning the horizon until he spotted them, 5 riders in pursuit of a lone figure on foot, racing across the grasslands like a pack of wolves chasing wounded prey. As they drew closer, Dusty could see that the pursued figure was too small to be an adult. It was a child, no more than 10 or 11 years old, running with the desperation of someone who knew their life depended on speed. The child's long black hair flew behind them as they zigzagged through the tall grass, trying to use every dip and rise in the terrain to break the line of sight with their pursuers. The riders were closing in fast, whooping and hollering like they were on some kind of hunt. Dusty's blood ran cold as he recognized what he was witnessing: a group of bounty hunters chasing a Native American child, probably trying to collect the scalp bounties that some territorial governments still paid despite federal laws against the practice. One of the riders raised his rifle, taking aim at the running child. Without thinking, Dusty spurred his horse forward, drawing his own Winchester and firing a warning shot into the air. The sharp crack echoed across the prairie, causing the hunters to pull up short and wheel around to face this new threat. "Hold your fire," Dusty shouted, riding hard toward the group. "What's your business with that child?" The leader of the hunters was a big man with a black beard and cruel eyes, wearing a mix of buckskins and military surplus that marked him as one of the professional Indian hunters who plagued the frontier. His name was Bull McGrath, and Dusty had heard stories about him in every saloon from Denver to Billings. None of them good. Well, McGrath said, his hand resting on his gun butt. "If it isn't the famous Dusty Rivers. Heard you'd gone soft, protecting redskins and such." "I protect children from men who hunt them for sport," Dusty replied evenly, keeping his rifle ready. "What's your beef with that kid?" McGrath's smile was ugly. "That ain't no ordinary kid, Rivers. That's Little Wolf, grandson of Chief Standing Bear, worth $500 to the right people, dead or alive." Dusty felt sick to his stomach. He knew about the unofficial bounties placed on the families of prominent Native leaders, usually funded by mining companies or railroad interests, who wanted to eliminate any potential rallying points for tribal resistance. But hunting children was a new low, even for scum like McGrath. "500, you say?" Dusty asked, as if considering the offer. "That's good money." McGrath's eyes lit up with greed. "Damn right it is, and there's plenty more where that came from if you want to join up with us. We got a whole list of targets, and your reputation with a rifle would come in mighty handy." Behind McGrath, his for companions a mix of drifters, failed prospectors, and career criminals nodded eagerly. They saw Dusty as a potential asset, someone whose skills could help them maximize their bloody profits. "Tell you what," Dusty said, appearing to consider the proposition. "Let me see this list of yours. If the money's as good as you say, maybe we can work something out." McGrath pulled a folded paper from his vest pocket, his guard dropping as greed overcame caution. "Here's just the first page. We got names from 3 different tribes, all worth good money to the territorial government and various private interests." Dusty took the paper and scanned it quickly, his rage building. With every name he read, men, women, children, entire families marked for death by people who saw Native Americans as nothing more than obstacles to progress and profit. "This is quite a list," Dusty said calmly. "Must have taken a lot of work to put together." "Damn right it did," McGrath bragged. I got contacts in the territorial capital, mining companies, railroad offices. They all want the same thing: peaceful expansion, without interference from the tribes. Peaceful. Dusty repeated, his voice dripping with sarcasm. Is that what you call hunting children? Something in his tone finally alerted McGrath to the danger. The big man's hand moved toward his gun, but Dusty was faster. His rifle barked once, and McGrath tumbled from his saddle with a bullet through his shoulder. Nobody move, Dusty commanded, swinging his rifle to cover the other for hunters. First man who reaches for iron gets a permanent case of lead poisoning. The hunters sat frozen in their saddles, clearly outclassed by someone who'd made his reputation with legitimate gunwork rather than murder for hire. But Dusty knew this standoff couldn't last forever. Eventually, one of them would try something stupid. Here's how this is going to work, he said, backing his horse toward where the native child had taken cover behind a low rise. You're going to turn around and ride back the way you came. If I see any of you in this territory again, I'll assume you're here to finish what you started, and I'll act accordingly. You can't fight all of us forever, Rivers, one of the hunters snarled. That breed ain't worth dying for. Dusty's eyes went cold as winter steel. Maybe not, but he's worth killing for. You want to test that theory? The hunters exchanged glances, clearly calculating their odds. McGrath was groaning and bleeding in the dirt, their leader taken out in the first exchange. Without him, they were just a collection of cowards and opportunists. This ain't over, another hunter said as they gathered up McGrath and prepared to retreat. The people paying us don't give up easy. Neither do I, Dusty replied. Spread the word. Anyone who comes hunting children in my territory answers to me. As the bounty hunters rode away, carrying their wounded leader between them, Dusty slowly approached the rise where the child had taken shelter. He could see a pair of dark eyes watching him from behind a boulder, alert and wary as a wild animal. Easy there, son, Dusty called out in the Lakota he'd learned during his time as an army scout. I'm not going to hurt you. The boy emerged slowly from his hiding place, and Dusty got his first good look at Little Wolf. He was indeed about 10 years old, with the strong features and intelligent eyes of his grandfather's line. His clothes were torn from his desperate flight across the prairie, and there was blood on his hands where he'd fallen while running. Are you truly going to help me? The boy asked in accented English, his voice steady despite his obvious fear. I am, Dusty replied, but those men will be back, probably with more friends. We need to get you somewhere safe. Little Wolf looked at him with the gravity of someone far older than his years. There's no safe place for my people anymore. The white man's hunger for our land grows stronger every day. The simple truth in those words hit Dusty like a physical blow. This child had seen more violence and hatred in his 10 years than most adults experienced in a lifetime, and now, because of who his grandfather was, he was marked for death by men who saw him as nothing more than a commodity. Maybe not, Dusty said, but I know some people who might be willing to help. Your grandfather, standing bare, is he still alive? Little Wolf's eyes widened with hope for the first time. Yes, but he is far away, in the sacred lands near the Little Bighorn. I was separated from our hunting party during a raid by these same men. They killed my father and my uncle. The boy's voice broke, and Dusty felt a surge of protective fury that surprised him with its intensity. This child had lost everything and was still being hunted like an animal, all because of the color of his skin and the prominence of his family name. Well then, Dusty said, making a decision that would change both their lives forever. I guess we'd better get you home to your grandfather. But first, we need to make sure those hunters don't pick up our trail. As they prepared to leave, Dusty realized he was committing himself to something far more dangerous than just rescuing one child. He was taking sides in a conflict that had been raging across the frontier for decades. But looking at Little Wolf's brave face, he knew he couldn't do anything else. Some things were more important than staying neutral and protecting innocent. Life was one of them. Subscribe to our channel to see how Dusty and Little Wolf survived the dangerous journey, and what shocking truths they discover along the way. 3 days into their journey toward the Little Bighorn, Dusty, Rivers, and Little Wolf had developed an unexpected partnership. The boy possessed an intimate knowledge of the land, That complemented Dusty's frontier skills, while Dusty's experience with tracking and evasion helped them stay ahead of the bounty hunters, who were surely following their trail. They traveled mostly at night, using creek beds and rocky ground to mask their passage, sleeping in hidden camps during the day. Little Wolf proved to be remarkably resilient for a 10-year-old, never complaining about the hardships or the constant danger. But Dusty could see the grief in the boy's eyes whenever he thought no one was watching. The loss of his father and uncle weighed heavily on his young shoulders. On the third evening, as they prepared to make camp in a sheltered canyon, Little Wolf suddenly grabbed Dusty's arm and pointed toward the rim. Dark figures were silhouetted against the setting sun. Riders, at least 8 of them, moving with the purposeful determination of a military patrol. More hunters, Dusty whispered. Little Wolf shook his head, his expression puzzled. No, these ride like warriors, but they are not my people. As the riders descended into the canyon, Dusty could see they were indeed Native Americans, but from a different tribe than Little Wolf's Lakota heritage. Their leader was a tall man in his 30s with the bearing of a seasoned warrior, wearing a mix of traditional and military clothing that suggested he'd served as an army scout. You there? The leader called out in accented English. Step into the light where we can see you. Dusty and Little Wolf emerged from the shadows, hands visible but ready to dive for cover if necessary. The leader studied them both for a long moment, his dark eyes taking in every detail. I am Joseph, Running Bear of the Crow Nation, he said. Finally, we have been tracking a group of white bounty hunters through our territory. Their trail led us to yours. Name's Dusty Rivers, Dusty replied carefully. This is Little Wolf, grandson of Chief Standing Bear. We're trying to get him home safely. Running Bear's expression shifted slightly. The Crow and Lakota had been traditional enemies for generations, competing for hunting grounds and horses across the northern plains. But something in the man's demeanor suggested this might not be an ordinary encounter. Standing Bear, Running Bear mused, a name of honor, even among our traditional enemies. But what is a white man doing risking his life for a Lakota child? Because it's the right thing to do, Dusty said simply. Those hunters aren't just after Little Wolf, they've got a list of targets from multiple tribes. Children, elders, anyone whose death might serve their employer's interests. Running Bear dismounted and approached them slowly, his warriors remaining mounted but alert. Show me this list. Dusty pulled out the blood-stained paper he'd taken from Bull McGrath, handing it to the Crow leader. As Running Bear read the names, his face grew darker with each line. My sister's name is here, he said quietly, and my nephew, who is only 7 years old. Then you understand why we're running instead of fighting, Dusty replied. This isn't just about one tribe or one family, it's about systematic murder for profit. Running Bear folded the paper carefully and handed it back. The bounty hunters who created this list, how many are there? I wounded their leader, Bull McGrath, but there were 4 others with him. By now, they've probably sent word for reinforcements. Could be 20 men hunting us, maybe more. One of Running Bear's warriors, a young man with fierce eyes, spoke rapidly in Crow. Running Bear listened, then translated for Dusty's benefit. Swift Eagle suggests we kill you both and take the boy to trade for safe passage through Lakota territory. Old hatreds die hard among our people. Little Wolf stepped forward, his young voice carrying surprising authority. Tell Swift Eagle that I am not a thing to be traded. My grandfather taught me that true warriors protect those who cannot protect themselves, regardless of what tribe they belong to. Running Bear studied the boy with new respect. You speak like a chief, Little Wolf. Your grandfather would be proud if he lives to see me again, Little Wolf replied sadly. These hunters have been killing my people for months. My father died trying to protect our hunting party. How many more will die for the white man's greed? The weight of those words settled over the group like a heavy blanket. Dusty could see the internal struggle playing out on Running Bear's face, loyalty to his own people versus the larger fight against a common enemy. Finally, Running Bear made his decision. Swift Eagle speaks from old hatred, but hatred will not save our children from these murderers. We will ride with you to return Little Wolf to his grandfather. Swift Eagle protested angrily in Crow, clearly disagreeing with his leader's choice. But Running Bear silenced him with a sharp gesture. "The boy is right," Running Bear said firmly. "True warriors protect the innocent. If we allow these hunters to divide us with old feuds, they will pick us off one by one until none of our children are safe." As the mixed group prepared for the next leg of their journey, Dusty found himself amazed by the turn of events. 3 days ago, he'd been a simple horse trainer making a delivery to town. Now he was part of an unlikely alliance between traditional enemies, united by the need to protect one child and stop a campaign of genocide. The journey towards Standing Bear's camp would take them through some of the most dangerous territory in Montana and claimed by various tribes, contested by the army, and now crawling with bounty hunters seeking blood money. But for the first time since this began, Dusty felt like they might actually have a chance. That night, as they camped in a hidden valley, Running Bear approached Dusty while the others slept. "Why do you really do this?" White Man, the Crow leader, asked quietly. "There must be easier ways to make a living than protecting Indian children." Dusty stared into the dying campfire for a long moment before answering. "I was an Army scout for 5 years, saw things that still wake me up at night. Women and children killed for no other reason than the color of their skin. I swore when I left the Army that I'd never stand by and watch that happen again, even if it costs you your life, especially then." Dusty replied, "A man's got to stand for something, or he's not much of a man at all." Running Bear nodded slowly. "Perhaps there is hope for peace between our peoples after all, if there are more white men like you, and if there are more native leaders like you willing to put aside old differences for the greater good." Dusty countered Dot as dawn approached. Their scouts returned with troubling news. Bull McGrath had indeed called for reinforcements, and a force of at least 15 bounty hunters was following their trail. Worse yet, the hunters had split into 2 groups, trying to surround them and cut off their escape routes. "We cannot outrun them much longer," Running Bear said grimly. "Soon we will have to turn and fight." Little Wolf, who had been listening to the adult's conversation with the gravity of someone far beyond his years, spoke up. "Then we must choose the ground where we make our stand. My grandfather taught me that the wise warrior chooses when and where to fight." Looking at the determined faces around him, Crow warriors who had put aside generations of tribal rivalry, a young Lakota boy who possessed wisdom beyond his years, and his own reflection in their eyes, Dusty realized they were no longer just trying to save one child. They were fighting for the soul of the frontier itself. Don't miss the explosive conclusion. Subscribe now to see how this unlikely alliance faces their greatest test and changes the course of history. The ancient rock formation known as Eagle's Rest rose from the Montana prairie like a natural fortress, its weathered sandstone walls offering both defensive positions and spiritual significance to the region's native tribes. It was here that Running Bear, Dusty Rivers, and their unlikely alliance decided to make their stand against the bounty hunters who had been pursuing them for 6 days. Little Wolf stood at the highest point of the formation, his young eyes scanning the prairie. Below, where dust clouds marked the approach of their enemies, the boy had grown visibly older during their journey, the constant danger and responsibility weighing on his shoulders like a heavy blanket. "They come from 2 directions," he reported to the warriors below. "McGrath leads one group from the east, maybe 10 men. The other group approaches from the south, 6 riders, maybe 7. Running Bear checked his rifle and nodded grimly. "They mean to trap us here. But Eagle's Rest has been a place of power for my people for generations. If we must fight, there is no better ground." Dusty positioned himself behind a natural barricade of rocks, his Winchester loaded and ready. Around him, 8 Crow warriors prepared for battle alongside Swift Eagle, who had grudgingly accepted his leader's alliance, but still watched Dusty with suspicious eyes. "Remember," Running Bear called out to his men in Crow, then repeated in English for Dusty's benefit, "We fight not just for ourselves, but for all the children these murderers would hunt. Let Eagle's spirit guide our aim." The first shots came from McGrath's group as they approached from the east, rifle fire echoing off the rock walls as the bounty hunters tried to find the range. Dusty could see McGrath himself, his arms still in a sling from their previous encounter, directing his men with the bitter fury of someone seeking revenge. "Rivers." McGrath's voice boomed across the prairie. You made this personal when you shot me. Send out the boy and we'll make your death. Quick, come and take him." Dusty shouted back, his rifle barking as he sent a bullet close enough to McGrath's position to shower him with rock fragments. The battle was joined in earnest as both groups of bounty hunters pressed their attack. The defenders had the advantage of high ground and cover, but they were outnumbered nearly 2-to-1 and had limited ammunition for a prolonged fight. Swift Eagle, fighting beside Dusty despite his earlier hostility, proved to be a deadly shot with his Spencer repeating rifle. "For someone I wanted to kill yesterday," he said in accented English during a brief lull in the firing. "You fight well for a white man, for someone who wanted to trade Little Wolf to his enemies." Dusty replied while reloading, "You're not bad yourself." Their grudging respect was interrupted by a cry from Little Wolf. "Grandfather! Grandfather comes!" Dusty looked where the boy was pointing and felt his heart leap. Across the western prairie, a line of riders was approaching at full gallop. Lakota warriors led by a tall, dignified man whose bearing marked him as a chief even at a distance. Chief Standing Bear had come for his grandson. The effect on both sides was immediate and dramatic. The bounty hunters, realizing they were about to be caught between two forces of angry native warriors, began to waver. Some started looking for escape routes, while others pressed their attack with the desperation of men who knew they were trapped. McGrath, seeing his carefully planned ambush falling apart, rallied his men with threats and promises of bonus money. "2,500 for the boy," he shouted, "and 1,000 for anyone who brings me Dusty River's scalp." But his men's hearts weren't in it anymore. They were killers and opportunists, not soldiers, and the approaching Lakota war party represented a force they couldn't hope to overcome. The tide of battle turned decisively when Standing Bear's warriors swept down from the west, catching the southern group of bounty hunters in the open prairie. The professional hunters, used to ambushing isolated families and defenseless villages, found themselves facing seasoned warriors who had been fighting for their people's survival for decades. Within minutes, half of McGrath's force was dead or fleeing. The big man himself, his wounded arm hampering his shooting, found himself isolated behind a boulder with only 3 of his original followers still fighting. McGrath, Standing Bear's voice carried across the battlefield with the authority of a man accustomed to being obeyed. "You have hunted my people like animals. Now face justice like a man." Instead of answering the challenge, McGrath did something that shocked even his remaining allies. He grabbed a stick of dynamite from his saddlebags and lit the fuse. "If I can't have the bounty," he screamed, "nobody gets anything." The madman was planning to blow himself up along with anyone close enough to be caught in the blast, including Little Wolf, who was only 50 yards away on the rock formation above. Without thinking, Dusty vaulted over his cover and sprinted toward McGrath's position. He could see the sputtering fuse, could calculate the seconds remaining before the explosion. There was no time for a careful shot. This had to be settled. Hand to hand, Dusty hit McGrath like a battering ram, driving both of them away from the rock formation where Little Wolf waited. The dynamite flew from McGrath's grasp, its fuse burning dangerously short as it arched through the air. The 2 men rolled across the rocky ground, fighting desperately for control. McGrath was bigger and stronger, but his wounded arm limited his effectiveness, and Dusty was fighting with the fury of a man protecting a child's life. They were still struggling when the dynamite exploded, the blast throwing both men apart and showering them with debris. Dusty felt a sharp pain in his shoulder where a rock fragment caught him, but he was alive and conscious. McGrath wasn't as lucky. The explosion had thrown him against a boulder, and he lay motionless in a spreading pool of blood. As the smoke cleared, Dusty found himself surrounded by concerned faces. Running Bear, Swift Eagle, and most importantly, Little Wolf, who had climbed down from the rock formation to check on his protector. "Are you badly hurt?" the boy asked, his dark eyes wide with concern. "Nothing that won't heal," Dusty replied, struggling to sit up. "But I think our hunting days are over." The surviving bounty hunters had either fled or surrendered, their leader dead and their cause hopeless. The bloody paper listing Native American targets for assassination was destroyed in the explosion. though Dusty suspected there were other copies somewhere in the territorial government offices. Chief Standing Bear approached them slowly, his weathered face grave as he took in the scene, when his eyes fell on his grandson. Alive and unharmed, the stoic mask slipped for just a moment, revealing the relief of a grandfather who had feared the worst. "Little Wolf," he said simply, and the boy ran to him. "Grandfather, Dusty Rivers saved me, and Running Bear of the Crow helped us, even though our peoples have been enemies." Standing Bear looked from Dusty to Running Bear, his intelligent eyes measuring both men. "It seems my grandson has learned something about the difference between enemies and friends. During his journey, the boy saved himself," Dusty said. "Getting to his feet with Running Bear's help, all we did was help him." "Get home, you did more than that," Standing Bear replied. "You showed him that there are white men who will risk their lives for justice, and you," he nodded to Running Bear, "showed him that old hatreds can be set aside when children's lives are at stake." The three men, Lakota chief, Crow war leader, and white frontiersman, stood together in the shadow of Eagle's Rest, united by their shared commitment to protecting the innocent. It was a moment that would be remembered in tribal stories for generations, a symbol of what was possible when people chose to see past their differences. That evening, as the combined groups made camp near a stream below the rock formation, Little Wolf approached Dusty with a carefully wrapped bundle. "My grandfather says I should give this to you," the boy said solemnly. "It belonged to my father." Inside the soft deerskin wrapping was a beautifully crafted hunting knife, its bone handle carved with symbols representing courage and honor. It was clearly a treasured family heirloom. "Little Wolf, I can't accept this," Dusty protested. "It should stay in your family. You are family now," the boy replied with the simple wisdom of childhood. "My grandfather says that bonds forged in battle are stronger than blood. You will always be welcome in our lodges." 6 months later, when territorial investigators finally tracked down the source of the assassination bounties, they found a web of corruption that reached from mining companies to railroad interests to territorial government officials. The scandal led to reforms in Indian policy and the prosecution of several prominent businessmen. But for Dusty Rivers, the real victory wasn't political or legal, it was personal. He had found something he thought he'd lost forever during his Army days, the knowledge that one person could make a difference, that standing up for what's right was worth any risk. And whenever he looked at the hunting knife Little Wolf had given him, he remembered a 10-year-old boy's courage, and the lesson that true strength comes not from the willingness to fight, but from the wisdom to know what's worth fighting for. Thank you for joining us on this incredible journey of courage, honor, and unlikely alliances. Subscribe to our channel for more powerful Western stories that prove humanity's capacity for good will always triumph over evil.